Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fourth webinar in the SELCAN series. My name's Heather and I help facilitate the running of the SELCAN network, who are your hosts today. SELCAN are a network of volunteer representatives from the private, public and third sector, and we come together to share best practice and expertise and drive forward action in relation to climate change. One of our members, John Henry Looney of Sustainable Direction, has a fantastic presentation to share with you this afternoon, and it's around transitions to renewable energy and energy advice. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and if you have any questions as we go along, please pop them in the Q&A chat and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Without further ado, I'll hand over to John Henry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't see you, so I'm sure you're there, some of you. I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to my background, and then we're going to go through some slides looking at renewable energy and kind of general energy advice and how to transition. That's a key word that Heather's picked. We can't do it tomorrow. It's going to take a while, and we can transition, of course, to follow our own business model. I'm been doing environmental work since the early 80s. I did my doctorate in an environmental subject. And then I worked doing studies on the Canadian tundra, looking at climate change from 83 to 85. Moved back to the UK, worked at the Natural History Museum, doing environmental monitoring work, and spent my career mainly working with engineers, helping people reduce resource use and consumption, and therefore energy requirement, and moving to renewable energy my entire career. So mechanical, electrical, civil, chemical, process, environmental. And I worked in about 35 countries or so. So I've had a lot of fun and made some progress. So I'm going to get stuck into this. I live in the Lincolnshire Wolds, if that's relevant to anyone. So I'm a local now, as it were. So there's an organization called the Climate Alliance. You can see the web link at the base down here, climateaccountingalliance.com. Carbon, excuse me. I think you should look at that as potentially joining it. It's a very good organization to look at. It's only new, and they've got hundreds of members. I'm one of which, of course, but looking at the opportunity to work together to solve the climate crisis. So that's just something to think about. This image here discusses the climate change between 1850 and 2022, and the blue shows the cold. The darker the blue, the colder. So there was quite a cold patch there, about 1900 or so. And you can see it's getting quite a bit warmer. And we've had some of the warmest days recently on record, as you're aware. And we're currently, if you live in Lincolnshire, experiencing unbelievably wet weather. And I can give you my answer for that later, if that's interesting. I was involved in some work in 1988 when we're looking at the Atlantic conveyor. And I can comment further if you wish. But this is just a really interesting graphic to show how temperature has changed in the last 150, 170 years. This is a model you can see for, again, same period of time. And the red is observed temperatures from 1850 and carrying on. And that baseline is the 1850 to 1900 value. The purple shows the model's results, which track the red reasonably well. And the blue down here shows the tracking of what would have happened without the climate change from humanity. And again, reasonable compliance. So I'm not going to go into this a great deal because we're not talking about climate here, but I wanted to show you some of the information just to show you how much this has changed. And the key thing here is, what impact will climate change have on your company? We're going to talk about that in a bit later, but you need to look at not just your impact on the climate, but also the climate's impact on you. So it could be flooding, it could be wind, it could be your supply chain. Can you get what you need to do what you do? This is Our World in Data. They have a very good graphical display of information. You can find that quite easily, Our World in Data website. And what this shows on this graph is the total fossil fuel land use change globally is about 40 gigatons, or 40 billion tons per year, up until recently. Fossil fuels making a large part of that. This is not total carbon emission. This is just from fossil fuels and land use change. Total at the moment is about 55 or 57 billion tons. This is annual carbon emissions. China is taking the lead. The United States is actually declining, which you might be surprised at. This is total emissions. India's up and coming. UK is down here. And just for interest, Ireland sort of just above the baseline. One of the things to be interesting is that we remember on that I'll go back one, oops. The 40 billion or so of greenhouse gas emissions, not including methane and N2O and things, but the UK is about 350 million. So we are less than 1% of total fossil fuel land use change emissions globally, which is quite interesting to think about. We'll come back to that later. So these are the annual emissions. Who would have thought the US is declining? And these are cumulative. The US is definitely in the lead. European Union is still ahead of China, but not for long. UK cumulative is definitely plateaued, which is good. And it's interesting to look at cumulative emissions from China in the last 8 years or so have exceeded the UK since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. These are just useful context data for you. So before we get into energy efficiency and carbon issues, this diagram, which is put together by myself and one of my colleagues, just shows scope 1, 2, 3. And sorry I can't see you because I'm hoping some of you will know all about this, but if not, scope 1 carbon emissions are from your company facility. Primarily, that's for most people burning gas. It does include other fuels and other emissions, including from refrigeration and whatnot. But carbon from your own company vehicles, and what's happened now as well, if you lease hire a vehicle, that's your emission. So scope 1 is your direct emissions. Scope 2 is your indirect. Primarily, this is purchased electricity. If you buy steam, heating, or cooling, so if you're a tenant in a building, you're buying heating and cooling, aren't you? So this is some of the ways to start to look at where does your carbon emission come from. Scope 1 and 2 are where to start. And then scope 3, we're going to come back to this a bit later, is the upstream and downstream. The ones that are easy, scope 3, are to look at your staff commuting, your business travel, trains, planes, buses, and hired cars, and waste generated in operations. These are quite easy to get. But to get to net zero under the greenhouse gas protocol and under the science-based targets, you have to account for all of these. You don't have to offset them, but you have to account for all of them. And so if you buy stuff from China, you're bringing carbon in the production of whatever that thing was, a car or a computer or something, if you like, you move it from the China column on the spreadsheet to the UK column on the spreadsheet. And so you're bringing carbon in, you're importing carbon. Picking up what I said a few minutes ago, the UK's carbon emissions about 350 million tons for fossil, and that's about 0.9% of global. We import about another 0.4% of global emissions. So the UK, including its scope 3 imports from all over the world, is about 1.4% of global, 1.3% of global emissions. We're the sixth largest economy and the 8th largest manufacturing country in the world. So the UK has made huge progress. Doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels. We've made unbelievable progress. And each of your companies has a contribution to make to reducing scope 1 and 2 to 0. That's kind of we're going to talk about what that means in a minute, and start to influence and impact your scope 3. And together, what you wanted, if you can see my hands, I'm not sure if you can or not, you work together with collaborate across your supply chain and your customers to, between you, ratchet down the overall carbon footprint. So scope 1 is heat sources, refrigerant gases, manufacturing burned on site. So in terms of energy efficiency, start thinking about kilowatt hours of gas you use or oil biomass, refrigerant gases that might escape. Do you have other industrial emissions and any fuels burned on site? Again, gas. And company vehicles. So this would be miles driven, and then you could calculate, or liters consumed of diesel or petrol, and you could then start to calculate your energy use to look at making more efficient and your carbon emissions. The indirect primarily is electricity. However, if you are a tenant, you will buy heating and cooling from your landlord. And so these fall into scope. To using the greenhouse gas protocol, you must include scope 1 and 2 calculations. And there's a link. You'll get these slides later. The scope 3 is much more complicated. We're not going to go into any great detail. But we will talk about it. Interestingly, the Irish legislation doesn't say net zero if you're interested in Ireland. It talks about carbon neutrality, and I'm going to pick up with that in a minute. A net zero target, this is from the Carbon Trust. There's a link there, is science-based targets is looking at net zero. To reach net zero, it's two conditions: to achieve a scale of value chain emissions consistent with the depth of abatement so that you limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And we're already bumping into that. And so we're behind as a globe. And then to neutralize. And I'm going to bring up later, I'm involved in a UN project at the moment to look at redefining completely carbon offsetting. And so the current models are broken, both voluntary and mandatory, and they're going to have to be changed. So the problem we have at the moment, if you plant a tree to offset your carbon, you have no idea if that tree is going to be there in 2 years, 10 years, 50 years. And so currently you get credit for that. In the future, once this has been redesigned, the work I'm supporting in a very small way, you'll not get credit for the tree and when you plant it, because it's not accountable. I'm going to skip this at the moment because this is not really what we're here for, but I just want you to understand the greenhouse gas basis to the energy efficiency and why it's so important to start with efficiency and then move across to the use of renewables to replace your existing standards. There's something called Past 2060, which is for carbon neutrality. And carbon neutral is where you have no net increase in global emissions. So what goes out comes in, is balanced. However, the EU and the UK is following is to get rid of the use of carbon neutral for products because of greenwashing, and it's going to be banned in 2026. So that's going to be banned from next year, really, 2025. So you're not going to be able to claim things are carbon neutral because it's not accountable and it hasn't included scope 3 properly. So if you want to get to net zero, first thing is measure your scope 1 and 2. And then prevent the use of energy, reduce the use of energy and offset, but that's going to go away to be carbon neutral. Then look at your net zero strategy, start to work on some of your scope 3s. And again, prevent by design or changing your business model, reduce your use of energy and offset. One of the things that's quite important in terms of reduction, here's a word, it's not my word, I think it's a great word, I didn't invent it, is a negawatt, which is a negative watt. And the easy way to understand what that means is if you put in an LED light bulb to replace an old style light bulb, old style in particular, say 100-watt light bulb, equivalent light creating LED would be something of the order of 6 or 8 watts. So you've created a negative, say it's 8, 100 down to 8 is 92. So you've created 92 megawatts. And that's a huge way to make savings. So the key way to do this is to look at your business model, how you drive, reduce mileage, reduce energy consumption by preventing it, then reduce it and go forward. So it's easy to do, really, to start looking at how to do this and how to reduce your energy consumption and be more efficient. Is get your natural gas, get the meter readings. And I can share later the conversion factors from the UK government. They're easy to find. I'll get Heather the link and she can share it with everyone. And owned and rented vehicle use in kilometers, miles, and liters of fuel, whether diesel or petrol. So start with your accounts department normally to find out how much energy you are using for heating, air conditioning, and how many miles, kilometers driven. And equally from your accounts department, the electricity consumption in kilowatt hours. And if you happen to buy steam, heating, and cooling as a tenant in a building, then you can get that as well. That's harder to get because people tend to not sub-meter if you're a one office in a building. It's becoming more common to do so, but is an issue. Decide if you're going to work on a calendar year basis or if you're business year or similar. There isn't a requirement. Some people like calendar years, some like to work to their business year. That's your decision. And then start looking at the energy use. And ideally, you want to go beyond the bills. You want to get the data as much as you can. And if you're larger than, you're sort of a large, small company or even medium size, you probably will be able to get half-hourly data from your electricity consumption company that you buy from, and get those half-hour data. And then you can look at the energy use, how it varies through the day. It's very important then to do that if you want to find ways to reduce. And then you think of yourself as a site. Think of yourself as a site. So scope 1, natural gas, vehicle. Scope 2, electricity. Start with that. Then here's the energy conversion factors. There's the link from that's the Irish link. I'll get you the UK link as well. But in Ireland that year, UK is about 200 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour for natural gas, and diesel was about 2.5 kilograms of carbon per liter. Same here. Electricity was in Ireland is much higher. It's about 330. In the UK, it's about 200 grams, roughly 210 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. So you then multiply. You then multiply the kilowatt hours by the conversion factors, and that gives you your carbon footprint. But today is really about not just delivering a carbon benefit, but delivering an energy benefit. I'm going to now take us down 2 different paths in the next half an hour or so, 25 minutes or so, to look at companies and what they've done to reduce their energy and their carbon. And some of you will appreciate naturally that by doing so, you should save yourself money. If you've created all these negawatts, then negawatts after the capex has been recovered tend to be free because you've invested in new light bulbs, you've invested in some efficiency measure, and therefore your use of kilowatt hours, use of energy will be less, and so you should be saving money. So you're tracking 3 things effectively. As an organization, you'd be tracking the energy use measured in kilowatt hours normally for both gas and electricity, and liters of diesel or petrol for the cars, or electric if you've got those. So you're tracking use and kilowatt hours typically. You're tracking carbon emissions by using the conversion factors and learning what the carbon emissions based on your energy use is. And you're also going to be tracking the money and figure out how much money you've been able to save by being more resource efficient, particularly, or changing what you do. I'm going to give you an example. I'm a member of the Wine Society. I had nothing to do with this piece of work, which is, in my view, excellent. And I'm going to share these slides later. But if you look at the Wine Society's website, they've really decided to tackle this in a major way. And it's quite exciting what they're doing. So there's they've got two reports at the moment available, others as well. Their carbon roadmap and how to look at packaging. And if you go to some of the beer companies, particularly, there's one over on the east coast of Suffolk, and they've said a number of times that every time they went to save carbon, they save money. And so we're going to follow that logic. So the Wine Society wanted to reduce their scopes 1, 2, and 3 with a comprehensive carbon reduction plan. And so they set carbon emission reduction targets across their business, which is mainly energy related, and they developed a plan how they're going to achieve their targets. And so they didn't know where they were going, but they've made a great start, and they've made great progress since they made that start. By the way, if you have any questions or something isn't clear, I think you can chat, let Heather know, and she can then let me know. So what they figured out, this was their greenhouse gas emission baseline for scopes 1 and 2, just over almost 1,100 tons of CO2. So they decided the first thing they wanted to do was to install solar panels to reach 80% of electricity generation, and that's their roof at their main warehouse. So they invested capital to reach 80% electricity generation on their own roof. Then the other energy, they purchased renewable energy from the grid, electricity in particular. They replaced all their natural gas use, and they've switched to using different refrigerants in the refrigerator. And they're in the process, they've switched now all of their vans to zero emission alternatives. And so this is how they're going to move from 2023 to 2028 to meet their target of getting rid of all of their scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions. They've energy cost in PV, they saved 180,000. And the other thing they've done is, this is where their packaging, their packaging was 600,000 a year, and they're reducing that tremendously. And they've done some work improving the nature-based footprint of their business. So they've saved 180,000 pounds by putting in the solar panels. They're saving probably 500,000 now on packaging, and they're improving nature conservation, which improves biodiversity and improves the lower carbon for their raw material, which is wine from other places. So this is what they came up with to get rid of their carbon. But you can see by putting solar panels on, they've supplied 80% of their electricity. One of the things that that's quite fun about looking at this, when you look at energy system stuff, which is kind of what this is about and what I do, the electricity that you need for refrigeration is primarily in the summer when it's hot, and to keep your wine cool, keep your warehouse cool. And solar panels are working the best in the summer. So there's a natural alliance or alignment between solar panels using the sun's heat to produce electricity to run the refrigeration units. And also, if you look at the, here we go. Look at the roof. Those panels are sitting some 100 millimeters or more, 6 inches, 200 millimeters off the roof. And therefore, some of the heat that would have gone onto the roof and into the building has been blocked by the panels as well. So that you get two winds there. So they've saved money, they've reduced carbon, and they've improved packaging, which is a really good combination story. And I wish I'd come up with this. This was their idea. They represent their carbon footprint in the shape of a wine bottle, and which is quite fun. So 31% comes from the making and disposing of glass bottles. Glass bottles have a huge carbon footprint. Their scope 3, their overall footprint was 16,000 tons. Scope 1 and 2 was the one we looked at a moment ago, nearly 1,100. So there's 15,400 tons from scope 3, which they only have certain control over. But their footprint overall, almost a third is from the glass bottles. 21% from shipping wine around the world. 17% from the production of the wine at the vineyards around the world. 11% from other packaging. 16% from their business operations, their warehouse. 5% from printing and postage and sending out newsletters, advertising their wine, and other goods and services they need to run the business. But one of the things that you may not know, that's interesting, this 21%, which is from the shipping of the wine itself. 20 from shipping the wine. What that means is, you may not be aware, a lot of the wine that if you drink wine, that comes from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, US and places, doesn't come to the UK in bottles any longer. It comes in large tanks of wine on a ship. And then when it reaches the UK, it's taken out of the tank on the ship and bottled here. And that's saved shipping glass around the world. You probably can't read this at the bottom, but each bottle supplied by the Wine Society, therefore, is an average carbon footprint of 1.35 kilograms of CO2 per bottle. A bottle holds about 750 mils. 750 mils, we'll call it 750 grams. So effectively, the carbon footprint is twice the weight of the wine. That's not exact, but you can see the story there. So how can they do better? And they're looking at it. So one of the key things for them, scope 1, 2, and 3, is the packaging. This is their scopes 1 and 2. So electricity was a big issue. Delivery vehicle fuel was a big issue. Natural gas, refrigerants, and a bit of red diesel. And we talked about how they're going to get rid of it. But packaging was the biggest area for their scope 3, the 31%, how they can deal with that. Bioproduction, marketing, operations, and the third party. So scope 3 reduction map is focused on packaging. When you get the slides, this is a useful definition of carbon neutrality, zero emissions, and net zero. So we've got to get rid of basically 100% of your 1 and 2 and reduce your scope 3 by 90% is the science-based targets. There it is there. Carbon renewables only for that last 10%. And so they've set themselves quite reasonable targets in terms of timescale to transition to this, because it's quite a big job what they've got to do. So they're proposing by this year to be equivalent carbon neutral in 1 and 2. They're investing in carbon removal projects on their supply chain, not offsetting. 100% reduction by 2028. A 50% reduction in their scope 3, which is the big number for them, by 2032, in line with global goal of keeping the world below 1.5. So that's the science-based target and what we're going to recommend that you look at. And then they're going to be net zero across all 3 scopes by 2040. To me, that looks like a sensible transition period where they can actually start to make early change, but they realize it's going to take a while, particularly on some of their scope 3. So they've not used carbon offsets. They've used nature-based projects in their suppliers' vineyards, and we're going to talk about that a bit more in the future. But what they've been able to do is share knowledge about nature-based solutions on vineyards in, say, Portugal, with people in France, Italy, Spain, about how they can reduce the carbon impact from growing the vines, growing the grapes. And the client, all the vineyards are quite happy to help each other at that level. So this is a sharing of the learning. They've switched to renewable energy in 2022. They put the PV on. They've made sure the refrigeration doesn't leak. They moved to a low carbon delivery mechanism, and they've moved to a lower carbon packaging. So this is showing genuine approach. They're saving money, reducing carbon, and they're doing it in a socially good way, getting their suppliers to talk to each other and help each other. Now, this is, again, a data point from World in Data. I'm not picking on beef. This is a global number. You'd be pleased to know that grass-fed UK number is much lower if you happen to eat beef. The one that worries me is the dark chocolate, but there it is. This shows wine at 0.9 kilograms. This is per kilogram of food. And the Wine Society is about 1.35 kilograms per bottle. So that's quite a bit bigger. Then that's 1.8 if you double that roughly. But it's a useful way of comparing the carbon footprint of various things that you might eat and or drink. So I just thought it was useful. 0.9, 1.35, they're in the same ballpark when you modify it. So this is what they're doing to get rid of their scope 3. This is where they are. They started off. They've got a 2032 target to basically bring it down by half. They're going to reduce their operational footprint a bit. They're making a big change on their packaging, wine production sharing to reduce it, third-party logistics, marketing materials, and to reduce emissions further. Most of these items, once they got into it, saved them money. By looking at how to reduce carbon, they found ways of saving money. And packaging, they did what's called a life cycle analysis. I seem to be doing a lot of this at the moment. 4 stages to look at how can we repackage the wine. They started off with 12 different options. Initially, stage 2, they reduced that to 6. In stage 3, they did detailed impact on carbon, water, content, likelihood recycling, and money. And stage 4, they're trialing bags and boxes, this one here, and PET containers. But the one that I think is really quite, and this one over here, this PET over here is really quite fun. Have any of you seen any of the wine bottles that look slightly squished? The advantage of that is you can get more bottles in a box. It makes the box heavier, but you don't transport as much air. And if you're bringing it from overseas, that does help significantly. But wine in boxes is not new. I'm sure some of you have enjoyed that over the years. But it's something they're doing. It reduces their carbon footprint substantially. So that was an example. That was an example of looking at what to do from a medium-sized firm. The Wine Society is medium firm. Most of us aren't that big. This is a smaller construction company, and they decided they wanted to go towards carbon neutrality and towards net zero. And so they said, what can we do to figure out how to do that? So we put together and looked at their carbon footprint, tons of CO2, working with this company, and found that the company lorries, cars, diesel use was the bulk of their footprint. They used a bit of oil at their headquarters. This is not the construction of the project footprint, just the business office, business headquarters. Some of that was electricity use, paper, diesel for car use, petrol, water use. So this is the big hitter for their carbon footprint. And one of the things they looked at in terms of transitioning is that they replace vehicles every 4 years, as many people do, 3 to 4 years. And so they put in place a program to change their vehicles to be more energy efficient, save money on fewer liters of fuel purchased, and reduce their carbon footprint. But this carbon footprint identified that their own Scope 1 vehicle use was by far the major impact. And the Scope 3, we only looked at a few of the items. So you can see this is again the use by the diesel vehicles was the main impact for the headquarters. And this is important when you look at your energy use, try to find ways to be more energy efficient and move to renewables. And these people have put solar panels all over their roof. You need monthly at least, ideally weekly, and even better, half-hourly data. But this shows the data use from January to December. And not surprisingly, they don't use as much in the summer because some of this is being used for running the heating system and lighting systems. And so this is quite interesting. What this shows you, though, that PV, which you get most of your energy in the summer, the curve is inverted, isn't it? And so you want to look here at alternative things to do to reduce this further, save money, and finding a way to move to renewable energy that would give you a curve that's shaped like that, where solar panels shape, it's the invert. Solar does the invert for you. So what you want to do to save money, be more energy efficient, is look at primarily your energy consumption. How can you reduce your energy use? By better insulation, by changing your lighting, by smarter systems use. There's a lot you can do. You don't need a consultant. You don't need people to come put solar panels on your roof straight away. What you want to do is first reduce. Secondly, you really want to reduce as well. And then replace carbon net fossil energy with renewables, either on-site or off-site. And then finally look to maybe some sort of offsetting, but actually don't really offset. What you want to do is to look at investment into opportunities to actually, again, prevent carbon by better land management, better activities on your part. The Wine Society is very good at, and so is that other firm, transparent carbon reduction. Consider switch to renewable energy. I've done that here. It makes a difference. Decarbonize your fleet over time. Sometimes you could go to electrification. You can train your drivers to drive better, and there was a project years ago called SAFED, which is safe and fuel efficient driving. And by proper driver training and encouragement, they were saving up to 20% of the diesel in the vehicles, just by basically getting rid of heavy feet and driving more sensibly. Define your carbon reduction targets that align with saving money, and track and report frequently, and then communicate and celebrate how well you're doing. This is an organization called Middlegate Software that's based in Manby near Louth, so on our patch. I'm helping them a bit, but there's a new software package they put together called Demos. What people found globally is once you made a start using Excel, that Excel isn't as efficient as you would like, and you've also got to keep checking it. So I worked with these guys up in Manby and on a couple of housing projects and then industrial projects, and they put together this Demos energy modeling software, which is being looked at now by several of the large banks for all of their customers, and it's also been picked up by one of the UN team looking at the carbon future as a tool to use to help people look at energy modeling. And so I'm making you aware that it exists. So most people, when you use energy modeling, and this is where you need to start, how much energy do I use? And This is a mix of electrical sources in year 5 of decarbonization plan. So the red is the load, that much an engine could do. That's what solar could do. That's what wind could do. It allows you to model and look at. There's a big drop, obviously, in the summer for some reason for that particular firm. Wind's not doing very much. Solar dropped at that stage as well for some reason. But looking at how much is it affordable? What's the cost effectiveness of putting in wind or solar? And which is the right energy solution for me, for electricity and heat, for my company? A lot of people have done this in Excel. This is the normal tool for this. Problems with this, it takes time to set up a new model. Even if you buy one, you've got to learn how to use it. There's lack of consistency in the use. If you create an Excel sheet and share it, it exposes your IP. Version control is a mess as well. And a lot of people make mistakes in Excel. So it's become less useful. What Deimos was set up is to help people make decisions on energy reduction. And this is an example from a factory here. This is electrical systems use and how they can model it. There's a site equipment load, heater use. This is what the engine could supply. This is what wind could provide and what solar could provide. And then this takes you forward in a controlled software to help you look at the energy use for electricity, energy use for heat, and then the financials. So revenue, discounted cash flow, CapEx, and expenditure. So it's a system that allows you to track your identify and model, ideally half hourly, your energy demand curve, use curve, and then look at how wind, solar, biodiesel, other energy options can meet that for you, and then takes it all the way down to the financial return. So what's your demand? Electricity, gas, fossil fuels, existing infrastructure, and carbon reduction targets. So if you're on this seminar to learn about how to reduce, be more efficient, measure your electricity use, measure your gas use, measure your fossil fuel use, and your for diesel or heating or whatever. Put all this as best you can into an Excel spreadsheet. Start with that. You don't need this software, but it probably would ultimately help you. But start with these, figure out what it is. Then look at solutions. What can you change on your site to reduce energy consumption? How can you change your business model to use fewer kilowatt hours, drive fewer miles? Then do solar panels meet your demand curve? We saw an example where they did not. Wind turbines is basically inverse to solar. There's biofuels, battery storage. One of the things about batteries is they do help, but they're expensive. And so they only make sense if you will use them on a regular basis. If you don't use batteries but 2 or 3 times in the year, they'll never pay for themselves. There's co-generated combined heat and power, different types of boilers, hot wells or heat storage, and transport options. So these are the things you'd want to look at on a site, assuming you're not just an office. How we can change our heat profile or demand curve, and then how can we meet it with solar or wind or other, and battery and other solutions. And Deimos has been set up to take you beyond Excel, and you can definitely start with that, no question, to look at what do transition planning, what if scenarios. It gives you full financial reporting. So cash flow, discounted cash flow, net present value, internal rate of return, and it helps you work on your own roadmap to net zero. And you can see that the Wine Society had roadmap themselves to get there by 2040. And then the other thing it does is it gives you the levelized cost of energy, and also gives you the carbon intensity per thing you sell or have as an output. So one of the things that happens here, carbon calculators that you can get online or easily sometimes typically work with monthly data and only give you a fairly high level. This is the red line, not a very accurate measure, but it gives you an idea. If you have a consultant work for you, working with Excel and similar models, this works on daily data quite often, and you can see the blue line, which is definitely an improvement over the red line. If you take it through to Deimos and you have the half-hourly data, which is really what you want, so it requires monitoring, then you get much more detailed analysis, and it gives you a much better answer in terms of, will this solution work for me or not? I'm not going to go through that. So that was me finishing. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed speaking to you. Hope you're still there. And I want to pan back to Heather to talk about Tony and what his company does that could help you as well.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much, John Henry. That was a great presentation. Really interesting, and some good practical advice there for people as well. I haven't got any questions in the chat at the moment, but if anybody online would like to ask any questions, please feel free to type in now and we'll still go back to them. I just wanted to highlight a service that South and East Lincolnshire Council's partnership are offering at the moment. We've got a specialist environment and energy advisor called Tony Newell. His contact details are at the bottom of the slide there. As I say, I just wanted to draw attention to this service because he's offering some really good tailored support for things like developing your carbon footprint, carbon reduction plans, and also things like energy audits. Could you go to the next slide, please, John Henry? There we go. There's a list there of some of the support that they can offer. But if you would like just to have a chat, a discussion, maybe look at having an environmental audit or some advice or some assistance with developing some of those sort of policy and strategic documents, please feel free to get in touch with those team, and I'm sure they'll be happy to support you. Okay.
And his details are down here as well.
Yeah.
You can see some of those data. And what I've found working over the years is, if you can start with someone like Tony to kind of, or me if you wish, but you can start with someone like Tony. One of the advantages that through Heather and Tony, there are some grants available, and this gets you up to a warm start, so you can really get your teeth into it. So I'd highly recommend you consider Tony, as of course, as well as Deimos, but start Tony's ability to get you a grant makes a good start for you.
Absolutely, that's right. The Grants for Growth is sort of, the scheme is centred around growing businesses, but also with that environmental hook on it as well. So if you're wanting advice, get in touch and have that discussion with them, and they'll may be able to help you one way or another, and may be able to help you develop some of your plans and access some of that funding. Looks as though we might have had a question. Oh, we've just got a comment thanking you for the presentation, John Henry. So we'll wrap up there. The final slide is just a list of some future sessions that we've got coming up. My email address is on the bottom and also in the chat as well. So if anybody's interested in finding out more about the SELCAN network and the work that we do, or you're interested in attending future sessions, please feel free to drop me an email, or of course you can also sign up through the registration form that you'll have used for today's session. But yeah, we've got no more questions, so we'll leave it there for today. But thank you ever so much to John Henry, and thank you all for joining us.